All right, so let's kickstart the last lecture. So today, what we are going to cover, three key components we are going to talk about. First, I'd like to talk about the GBAs. So the GBA grades are released. You can check them on Canvas already. So we'll go through the GBA first, so that because I'll think that at least one member from each group might be around, and then we'll allow some time for the rest of people to join before going to the lecture materials. So we'll do GBA first part. Second part will be the lecture materials, and then the last part there is a bit of like revision kind of. If you have any questions, I hope I can answer them as well. So that's the objective for today. So I'd like to repeat as well. As you guys know, because now I'm in New York, it's very, for my side, it's very noisy. So just now, somebody feedback that you can't really hear the background noise, which is good. But do feel free to stop me anytime or ask me to repeat if there's like suddenly a loud siren and you can't hear what I'm talking. All right. So you don't miss out anything. All right. So I hope you have seen the GBA grades as well as the comments. Generally, I think everyone did very well. I think all groups scored at least 60 and above, which is very good. And you have groups that score 80 or even 90 marks. I think that's very good. So as it gives you a very good foundation. So those that worked hard for in the group GBA as well as the TMA, then you have less stress for the finals, which will be in May. I think it's almost 3 weeks time. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the GBA questions. So there are three key questions. All right. So question one is about WACC. And this is like kind of a real life scenario where they give you data that is available, in this case, in S&P Capital IQ. Okay, so they give you actually a lot of data, and I'm sorry, let me just pull out my pen. And I want to highlight that a lot of the data, right, can be very tricky because the part that you need to be careful of is which data should you use for the calculation of WACC. So it's not like a typical problem question where you can only use information given to you and they typically do not trick you. But in this case, picking the right numbers is very important. All right. Okay, so as all you have done the question, right? We need to calculate WACC. So first of all, we need to calculate what's the market value of equity and market value of debt. So when we think about market value, we need to look at what is okay. So you might for equity, you need to use the market cap, which is this number here, instead of the equity book value. So remember, so flip back to the notes on WACC. The formula is always market value. So you have to be very careful in this case. I think some groups also what they did is they use the number of outstanding shares multiplied by the share price here. Some use average, some use opening. I wasn't too strict about it. That's fine as well. You should be able to get the number of share outstanding multiplied by the share price will give you the market value of equity as well. So that the main thing is that you should not use the book value here because the right formula is to use market value. All right, that's one thing. Now in terms of market value of debt. So when we look at this question, right, so I'm going to scroll here as well. There is no market value of debt given. So in this case, what we have no choice, but is less, I would say less optimal, is to use the book value of debt, which is given here. Anyone can remember how do we calculate market value of debt? I mean, this can, I don't know, maybe in the finals or might come out or what, but if anyone do remember how to calculate? Hopefully you're doing your revision already. How do we typically calculate market value of debt? Anyone can recall? So I'm saying this borrowing, which is based on the balance sheet, right? BS balance sheet is not very optimal, but if we have no choice, we have to use it. But in the equity case, if we are given book value and market value, you always must use market value. So for borrowings, how do we calculate, or for debt, how do we calculate the market value? Anyone recall? Remember, typically we use, for debt, we use what? Which instrument? We use bonds, remember? So if we can find what is the market value of the bond, we can use the market value of bond as the debt instrument. All right. So just remember, the market value of debt is market value of bond, which is the present value of the bond. So in if you flip back to the examples that we went through during class, there was this part where it's like the present value of the bond is XXX amount. So you should use that amount. And remember, we do not use the par value of the bond or the future value of the bond. We do not use that. Always use the present value of the bond, which is that is the market value. Right? That's important to take note of. But in this case, we do not have any values for market values for debt. So we have no choice. We use the book value. At the same time, remember we had, in most cases, we had to calculate this IY, right, for the bond using that time value of money. But in this case, again, we do not have the bond information. So we have to take borrowing cost, the finance cost divided by the total borrowings that we have done. All right, beta is given here. So we need to use the beta for CDL. I'm going to flip over here. So there is this other beta here of this industry. But remember, WACC is what? WACC is the weighted average cost of capital for the firm. So we need to use the beta for the firm, not the industry. Okay. Now, regarding the debt, going back to the debt, we are given a few information here. T-bill 6 months and a government bond. So there is some group that treated this government bond as debt, the debt component of WACC, but that's wrong. It's not part of debt, because you know why? Because this is government security. So anything related to government, right, it's not the debt of the firm. So it's just the risk-free. So the question is, which is the correct risk-free? So we know these two are risk-free, right? 6 months and 20 years bond yield. There is no right answer to it, but there is optimal answer. So the optimal answer is this. This is the optimal answer. Okay, why? Even though we say T-bill, if you flip back your notes, T-bills are considered risk-free. That's true. 20 years government bonds might not be risk-free. But why do we not use 6 months T-bill? It's because the maturity is too short. So the maturity, right, so how do we select the risk-free rate? Typically is that the maturity of the risk rate should match the maturity of your project that you are trying to assess. So in this case, we are doing a renewable sustainability kind of related project, right? And generally this kind of project, capital intensive, it's not like a 6 months project. It's quite certain. It's at least 5, 10 years, etc. So the optimal is this. But the good thing is that we are not too strict about this. So some groups use 6 months T-bill as the risk-free. That's fine. So some groups need average. So average is fine. But normally you can just take the year that you want, right? So in this one is I think it's 2020. 2022. So you take the latest year. So 2022 figure. So this one and this one. All right. Any questions regarding this, the calculation of WACC? So I basically just point out some common mistakes and some tricks that that the question try to trick you. So it's like the beta, they give you the industry beta. So some groups might have used industry beta instead of the beta of the firm, and then you might have used this 20-year bond yield as like the debt yield, which is not correct because the government bond yield is just risk-free. So as usual, if you have any questions, do stop and chat, unmute yourself or just type the group chat. Yeah, if not, we'll carry on. So that's the first part to calculate WACC. The second part is more on predict the WACC for the venture into solar power industry. So the important thing to take note is we also went through in the class is that for WACC is the weighted average cost of capital for the firm. So it's not project. Remember, we went into the whole discussion, we have to risk adjust the WACC using the beta. So that's the main that's the important part that you need to mention, that you want to risk adjust the WACC for the beta. All right. Because we note that the beta of renewable industry is 1.59, which is, remember, anything above 1, that means it's more risky than the market. And we know that the beta of CDL is this, right? Less risky than the market. So what we have to do is we have to do a risk adjustment. Or we need to suggest that the WACC has to be risk adjusted. And there's this one more thing also, we need to talk about this. There's a comment on the issuance of green bonds. So we need to kind of mention whether you feel that this issuance of green bonds could increase the cost of debt or decrease the cost of debt. So both ways are fine. With proper justification, you will get the full marks. But if you miss out this green bond, then that's the part where you might lose some marks. All right, we're good. Okay, so this question, the first part, we're asked to appraise the riskiness. So we also kind of have a similar question in our lecture. If you recall, I can't remember what's the example, but it was also 2 companies, right? And then we talk about standard deviation and beta. So the main thing you need to talk about in this question is systematic risk and unsystematic risk, and how standard deviation captures total risk, beta captures only systematic risk. And because in this is about investment portfolio, so you need to mention how correlation impacts the portfolio overall risk, meaning that how creating a portfolio of these 2 stocks reduces the unsystematic risk because of correlation. And if you mention correlation, you should get the full marks already. If you can even mention what is the possible correlation, and this is quite easy in a sense. We see that Apple is technology, and I guess they say Amazon is a retailer. So we know that retail and technology, even though Amazon kind of tech also, but both of it are in different industry, right? So most likely they will not be correlated. That's what we don't want, right? For risk diversification, we want it to be uncorrelated. So very high chance uncorrelated. So if you can even suggest, they are uncorrelated, there will be a reduction in unsystematic risk as we create a portfolio of these 2 stocks. Yeah, then you get the full marks. All right. Any questions so far? Nope, we're good. Okay, great. All right. So for part B, I think generally is fine. Most groups manage to get the marks. If you can most groups will either get full marks or you get maybe 10 marks, half the marks. Okay. But this question is important because I want to show you how to do it. Most of the groups did it manually. So you did using simultaneous equation, right? 3 simultaneous equation to get the answer. But I think only one group did it using Excel. So I want to show you how to use Excel to do it, because in the exam, you have no time to do manual simultaneous equation, and you for sure will not be able to finish the exam. So in case a very similar question come out, or any question relating to simultaneous equation, use Excel. So I always like to think that Excel is excellent, but because you are expected to use Excel, if you do not use it, you are disadvantaging yourself and you might not even finish the paper. So let me show you how to use Excel to solve this question. And it takes like, I guess like 1 second to do it. Of course, you need to set up Excel sheet. Okay. So as you can see my Excel sheet here. All right. So I've set it up quite nicely already. Basically, I have put in the information here. All right. And remember, you have to put the treasury as well. I know treasury is 0 in terms of the beta. Okay. So expected return, how we calculate expected return? We just take what is the risk-free rate. So we are which is 3%, plus, remember, plus the beta times the market risk premium, right? In this case, yeah, the market, I'm just looking at a question, yeah, the market risk premium of 5%. And so this is how we get the expected return. So we set up this as formulas, all right? So everything has to be in formula. It's important that it has to be formula, for this to work, because we are going to generate the figures here. SD is given to us, so we just put the SD here, all right? And so we have, I've put in the portfolio expected return, which is given here. So it is given by all this, and the beta, which is given by this. But of course, now the weights are all 0, so it's just 0. All right. So the main thing is, I would like to use this solver. I believe you might have learned it, right? Have you all used this solver program before? This solver thing? Yeah. Okay, good. Perfect. So this is not new, and it is good. And it's good that it's not new. All right. So once we have this solver in place, let's set the objective. So what's the objective here? So objective, right, is this. So we want this thing, all right, portfolio expected return, to be this, the value of. So we want it to be 6%, right, given the question. So I hope you have a question in front of you. So you want it to be 6%, which is good, which is what we want to achieve. By changing what? So by changing the variables in itself. So we want to change the weights here. So we want to change the weights here, right? To give us that 6%. Now, we want to set a constraint as well. So what's the constraint? So we want to constrain the portfolio beta to 0.6. So we add a constraint here. So you can add constraints like this. All right, but I've already added it. So I'm going to cancel. All right, so once you do this, you just click solve. And can you see his answers here? So you click OK, and then we get answers. So these are immediately your answers. You get the full marks. So if you remember, when you do your exam, when you do screenshots, please include the referencing ABC and 1, 2, 3, 4. And include, if you are using solver, including the what you have inputted here in the solver function. All right, because this is important. In case there are mistakes, at least you can get partial marks for, oh, okay, maybe you did not put a constraint, or you missed out something. All right, so you should get this answer here. I want to highlight that this is not the only answer. Why? So there can be a lot of possible answer, because what solver did, right, is to come up with the, I guess, most like balanced answer. But let's say we want to constrain something. Let's say, okay, I'm trying to explain to you why there could be multiple answers. So let's see why there can be multiple answers. Let's add a constraint. Let's say we want to constrain this to be less than or equals to maybe 0.1. All right, let's add this constraint. Can you see that now this has changed? Even though you do get the answer 6% and 0.6 here. So what I'm trying to say is that this question, because we are using 3 different variables, there can be many answers. So none of the groups have exactly the same answers, simply because there can be multiple answers here. So do not worry if, let's say, you're comparing your answers to our group. It's like, hey, why is it different, but you get full marks? So don't worry, there can be multiple answers. So it depends on how you constrain your weights. The values can change. Any questions for this solver? So I want to repeat again, whenever you're doing simultaneous equation in your final exam, please use the solver and don't calculate by hand. Okay. Okay. Now let's continue. So for we did part B already. Now for question 3, generally all of y'all did very well. Part A. So part A, right, for question 3, the main thing you need to talk or to say is that efficient market hypothesis is not respected, right? Because Miss Peter could get more than the stock market return. He get 25%. The stock market return is only 12%. So you need to say that. And then comment a bit about like what does efficient market hypothesis actually suggest or even mean, right? Explain a bit of efficient market hypothesis, and then you say that it's violated. So that's for part A. For part B, I believe all the groups got full marks. Basically, you just say something about what kind of strategy. Most people suggest that ETF kind of strategy, just get a diversified portfolio, then you should get the full marks really. So part B is no problem. All right. So that's all that I want to cover for the GBA. Any questions after you have seen your mark scripts? Any queries and doubts that you have? Maybe it's a bit too early. Most people haven't wake up yet, but okay, let's carry on with the lecture proper now. All right, let me just close this. Okay, let's go to the lecture proper. So today, what we're going to cover is on short-term financial planning. The topic is not very heavy. And I'll say that this is quite easy. So the good thing is this is the last lecture. So it's not super heavy like what we have done previously. Kind of more chill, a bit of calculations, and I'll as I go along, I'll say that these calculations are important. To take note of them. They are very mechanical in the sense that questions are very standard. There's no like twist and turn. So you follow the steps, you can get it right. All right. Okay, so let's think about what is short-term working capital kind of management. So the idea of this is that, remember, we have working capital, which is capital that is being used for the daily running of the business, right? And for working capital, we take CA minus CL, right? So because it's used for daily running, includes things like buying raw material, including the sales, because sales you receive the money, right? So how the movement of the cash will kind of impact your working capital management. All right. So there are two options here. And these two options are given to you in a sense of very extreme options. Of course, most firms fall in the middle. So extreme option number one is that, oh, you know what? We pay the supplier in cash, all right? But the customer will only pay us back on credit. Means what? It means that our cash is going out of our pocket, right? Because we have to pay our suppliers. But at the same time, we are not getting money from our customers. We are getting it slowly, or we are only getting it after 49 days. So that's a long time, which means what? There is a high working capital, low cash, and generally there's a low ROA, right? Return, remember return on asset is return divided by total asset, right? So generally a low ROA. Now, if we look at the other extreme means what? That we get a credit from a supplier, very long, 60 days credit from a supplier. Now, in a sense, we have almost like a just-in-time inventory management, where we get our customer to give us cash on delivery. So this is almost like a supermarket business, right? Our customers, for example, when we go to shop in the supermarket, we pay cash. I mean, even if you pay credit card, it's kind of like cash, right? And the thing is, usually supermarkets, they do not pay their suppliers immediately, right? Their vendors, like things that right, they usually have some credit terms. And so this is a very extreme case where you require very low working capital requirement because you have very high cash flow. You keep on getting cash very quickly. And in fact, you might have excess cash. So you will have high ROA here. So those are the two key things. So when we think about working capital management, if if we are in this scenario here where there is so-called high working capital requirement, then we need to think about how can we get cash in the interim, right? In between here, payment of the suppliers and getting money from our customers. How do we get cash? And that's what we're going to look at. It's a bit more like theoretical, where we look at what are some options available, like what are the banking solutions that banks can provide. So before we go there, this is a slight repeat. Working capital requirement, working capital is CA minus CL. The goal of working capital management is that we need to ensure that sufficient cash, in a sense that, let's say if we are in option one or scenario one, where we have very little cash in hand, then we need to approach a bank to get like some kind of working capital financing, we call it, or like trade financing. So like short-term kind of financing to ensure that we have enough cash, right? So working capital management can affect the risk and return and share price. Of course, you know, there's this saying that cash is king. If you don't have cash, then you can go bankrupt, or you will go bankrupt. All right, so remember this case, the first case, that there is high working capital requirement, low cash, and therefore there's a need for financing. So we need to go to the bank for financing. But in the option two, we have no need for financing because we have a lot of cash, right? Remember, option two was that we get cash immediately from our customer and we pay our suppliers much later. Okay, so sources of cash, this one you can look at it. Sources and users, you can look at, not too important. All right, now let's move on slightly. So that's so much about working capital management. Now let's think about more of the operating and cash cycle. And these are again not new concepts. We have seen all of these before. We have seen these three things, right? We have seen accounts payable period, inventory period, and accounts receivable period. So all these are not new concepts, but now we are going to combine them to provide you with this operating cycle and cash cycle. And so what are they? Let's have a look. So operating cycle. So operating cycle is the time. So operating cycle is the time between when the firm originally purchased the inventory. So we're talking about purchase of inventory and receive cash from selling the product, right? So since we're talking about inventory, we're interested in the inventory period and the accounts receivable period. So we add both of them up together, it gives us the operating cycle. This is a recall slide. So recall lecture 1. And I want to highlight something here that's very important. I'm just going to use a different color. Okay, in case because this again has not been like tested in any TMA, GPA. So I would like to place more emphasis to highlight, because it might come out, or there's a higher chance that it will come out in the finals, right? So number one is that when we look at accounts receivable period, one important thing is that you only consider credit sales. Okay, so if a question has both credit and cash sales, you omit cash sales. Okay, so if it's cash sales, no cash sales. Okay, we only credit sales, because only credit sales will cause accounts receivables, right? Another thing, we always have to use average if we are given average. If we are given 2 years, sorry, let me just get some water. Okay, so if we are given 2 years, we must use the average. If we are not given 2 years, then no choice, we'll just use one year. All right. Sorry, I think you guys probably can hear the siren. All right. So this is the this one example here. Not a new example. So in this case, what we are given here, we are given the average cost of orange per month. We are given the total material, the number of orders for 12. So we can calculate what is the inventory turnover using the formula. And in this case, because we do not have, oh no, they give us average, so it's fine. We have the average inventory here. And then inventory period, we just take 360 divided by the inventory turnover, right? So again, all these, hope you kind of stimulate your revision as well of lecture 1. You kind of remember all these ratios. So we can calculate again the sales or receiver turnover. So we calculate receiver turnover, then receiver period. And at the end of the day, right, operating cycle, remember, is inventory period plus receiver period. So this is what will be done here. Usually typical question will ask you, interpret this number. So what does this number mean? So the interpretation is important. That's why it's in red here. That the interpretation is that, oh, it took 48.7 days to receive inventory, sell it, and collect the receivables generated from the sales. Right? It makes sense, right? Because we have the inventory period plus the accounts receivable period, right? So it is the time taken to receive inventory, sell it, and collect it. Any questions? So in this, I guess this interpretation, so this part here is a little new. We have not seen it, but previously whatever here is all what we have seen in lecture 1. Okay, I'll carry on. All right, we have a small discussion question here. We have this company called Two Door Down has a weekly credit sales of this, average collection period of this. So now what we are doing here, we are using the formula in different way, right? So the question is, what is the average accounts receivable figure? So we know that the weekly sales, this is weekly, right? So what we are doing, we are trying to find what is the daily sales. So we just take this divided by 7 to find daily. But once we know the daily, then we can do what? Because we know that they will take 37 days to collect, right? So what do? We just take 37 days times the daily here, right? This times 37. And it gives us what is the accounts receivable that is there for 37 days. And this is the answer here. All right. Okay. So now we go on to cash cycle. So in terms of cash cycle, what are we interested in now? We are interested in the time between payment of inventory and receipt of the sales of the inventory. So a cash cycle is measured by how long we need to finance the inventory and the receivables. So we just, what is cash cycle? So we take the operating cycle minus away the payable period here. So okay, if the intuition behind it is that now we have operating cycle, right? If we remove the account payable period, then it gives us the time between the payment, right? Which is what is mentioned here, the time between the payment of inventory and receipt from the sales of inventory, right? So hope it makes sense, right? It gives us that kind of figure. So we do have a question here as well. Now in this question, can you see that they give us beginning and ending? Okay, generally they don't give us this, they'll get you to calculate it. But in this case, you know, they are nice, they give it to you. They give you what's the average. So we should use average here in this sense because we have beginning and ending, right? So these are the calculations. I will not run through all of them like step by step because I think it's a bit more repetitive, and we have done this in lecture 1. But I want to just highlight to you that operating cycle, remember, is the inventory period plus receivable period. All right. So operating is inventory plus receivable, and the interpretation of this is important. So it took 8 days to receive the inventory, sell it, and collect the receivable generated from the sales of the inventory. Okay, but this is operating cycle only. Now, how do we calculate the cash cycle? So we need to calculate what is the account payable period. All right. And then we just take operating cycle minus the account payable period here, which is 39. So what does this mean? Again, the interpretation is important. It means that inventory and receivable must be financed for 1 to 9 days before the firm receives cash. Oh, sorry, there's a missing here. Before the firm receives the cash. Or another way to think about it is that the firm receive cash on average 1 to 9 days after paying its suppliers. Right, so there are 2 ways that we can interpret this cash cycle. Any questions? Okay, so perhaps no questions at the moment because this is a bit more repetitive. There is this other question. I'll leave it to you to go through it. Is a very similar question. Again, the answers are provided. There's this comment here about the negative cash cycle. So can a firm have a negative cash cycle? So this is important, is that yes, the firm can have a negative cash cycle. Why? Is that first of all, they sell and collect cash. They do the sales, but they collect cash faster. And so what kind of business is it? That generally is considered this thing called just-in-time production. Just-in-time meaning what? That you only produce the goods when the customer orders. And it means that you do not, your inventory cycle or inventory days is very short, right? And then after that, your receivable is very fast. And your payables are also very long because, for example, you take a long, you get your supplier to give you a long period. And because remember, your cash cycle is your payable, operating cycle minus your payable. So if your payable is very big, but your operating is small, it becomes a negative, right? So this is an example of a negative cash cycle. And in this case, it's the just-in-time production. All right. Now, in terms of this short-term financial policies, what we have is that there are two key sources of liquidity, and how liquidity is managed. So short-term financial policies relate to liquidity management, and we have two key sources, primary sources and secondary sources. So generally, companies focus on primary sources because secondary, if you notice, they're all very negative. That means like your company is really going to go bankrupt, then you have no choice, then you have to use the secondary sources. But if you have choice, you will never use the secondary sources, right? You will focus on primary sources. And the primary sources are like cash, short-term funds, maybe we have some kind of like bank lines. Bank lines is considered loans, trade credits, investment portfolio. Yes, so primary is for the day-to-day operations. I guess secondary you can consider as day-to-day as well, but it's like you are like your company is really going to fail or going to bankrupt, then you use the secondary sources to meet the day-to-day. Because at the end of the day, both of these sources are for liquidity management. Liquidity management are for day-to-day, generally for day-to-day. Yeah. So both are for day-to-day, but secondary means that the company is going to fail, then you use secondary sources, liquidity. In terms of policies, these are again two very extremes. So flexible or restrictive. So what does flexible mean? So flexible policy, right, means that you have large amount of cash on hand. You have large amount of inventory, and you give very liberal kind of trade credits. So because of that liberal trade credits, you have very large accounts receivable. And so you have first of all, high liquidity. Why high liquidity? Because you have a lot of cash, right? So it's flexible. I think we have a diagram here. Let me just have a look. Okay, so maybe we look at the diagram first of flexible, then we go to restrictive. Okay, so can you see a flexible is that first of all, we have we use so-called long-term financing. Okay, wait, let's explain this. So this graph shows you the change in the required cash, right? So it fluctuates like almost like a oscillating, like based on the months. Maybe it's like, oh, December they move more cash because there's more sales, etc. So what's happening here in a flexible policy is that we are going to take long-term financing. So long-term financing is this whole chart, is this line here. So we're going to take long-term financing to cover the cash demand, that goes up and down like this. Can you see that we're using long-term financing to do it? Why is this bad? Long-term financing is generally very expensive. Long-term meaning like can be 5 years, 10 years, and generally they're more expensive than using short-term financing, which is makes sense, right? If you take a longer term loan for your house, or maybe like you buy a car, you take a longer loan, it's more expensive, right? So a flexible policy, yes, you might have, can you see, pockets of space where you have excess liquidity here, right? But this excess liquidity comes at a cost, and the cost is the cost of long-term financing, which is expensive, right? So this is a flexible policy. Now, if we go back to the restrictive policy, so restrictive policy, what does it mean? It means that you want to restrict as much as possible the cash that you have on hand. And because of that, you might have low inventory. You do not want to produce too much inventory. And because you have low cash at hand, you do not require so much trade credits. Or sorry, you try not to give too generous trade credits to your customer, meaning you want them to pay cash, right? You want them to pay cash. And so with this restrictive policy, generally there is low liquidity here. And one way to look at it is, again, using the financing, right? So now what's happening? We use long-term financing to only cover the base. Can you see? It only covers the base of the requirement using long-term financing. So it's fixed. Now, we use short-term financing to cover the movement in terms of the requirement. So when there's a sudden increase in the requirement of cash, we use the short-term financing to do it, right? Can you see here? We use short-term financing because there's increased requirement in cash. So it's short-term financing. So this allows us to both maximize the use of short-term and long-term financing and reduce the cost of financing because we use lesser amount of long-term financing compared to the flexible policy where you can see the whole thing is long-term financing. But in this case, it's only a smaller portion that's long-term financing here. So this is a restrictive policy. Again, there are some disadvantages and advantages. You can just look at it. Nothing too complicated. I want to highlight just some important ones. Okay, so the important ones is this thing here. For flexible policy, there is a mismatch in the tenor. Remember? Okay, I'm just going to flip back to this chart here. In the restrictive policy, what happens? We are using short-term financing. Can you see we are using short-term financing to meet the short-term requirements, right? The peak requirements. We are going to use short-term financing to meet short-term requirements. Now, in the flexible policy, we are using long-term financing. We are using long-term financing for various short-term kind of movement, right? Oscillating movement in the market of for cash. So because of that, right, there's a mismatch in tenor, and like what I explained, long-term debt can be expensive. So it's not good to have such a mismatch in the tenor of your financing with the requirements of the firm. All right, so the rest I think you can look on your own, not too complicated. This one in terms of restrictive, the main disadvantage is that there's less liquidity during emergencies. Yes, you might try to lower the cost that you have, but the thing is that it's at a expense of lower liquidity. So choosing the best policy. So what is the best policy? The best policy, generally, most companies use a compromise policy, meaning what? That you do not do the extreme flexible or restrictive. You do something that is middle. And we want to consider various things, right? Like what's the amount of cash reserve you have, what is the maturity. So remember maturity hedging, meaning what? Remember the demands are short-term, so you want to use short-term financing for that. And then the base of the peaks are more long-term, so use long-term financing. So you're trying to match the maturity here. And of course, what is the interest rate compared, like short-term financing, what's the interest rate, long-term, what's the interest rate? So what does this look like? So compromise policy is something like this, right? Where we have, so this is a restrictive, is the very strict, flexible, and the compromise is here, right? So it's here. So there is seasonal variations. So there are seasonal variations like this, and like this, and which we will use long-term financing for, right? The rest will be using the long-term financing here. There will still be no choice, some compromise that you have to do where there is pockets of space. Can you see pockets of space here where there is excess cash that you don't need so much cash, but you no choice, you have the cash because you're using a compromise policy. So I guess in this case, there is a bit of a, like what the policy say, compromise, right? So you're not being super strict, but at the same time, you have some kind of short-term financing for some variations. Right? Okay, in terms of what usually bank can provide, so banks usually they have various kind of short-term loans, but loans are, the thing is, they are not the only kind of products. So we do have loans here, unsecured and secured loans, but generally a bank go into very much detail in terms of what what are the name of the loan. So we have this thing called line of credit. So the important thing is you do not read. So I did not put in all the details here. If you notice, I did not put all the details, means that you do not know you need to know the details. You just need to know they exist for your finals, right? So I'll explain to you the main ones, but you do not need to worry too much about the details or whatever I explain. It's just more for like good general knowledge as well. Okay, so in terms of line of credit, we have committed, uncommitted. Means what? Committed means that the bank will have to give you this loan whenever you want it, right? Uncommitted means what? It means that if you want the loan, the bank will say, wait, let me check whether your balance sheet is okay. Let me check whether you're profitable first before I give you a loan. So those are two separate things. Of course, then you say, oh, then I always want committed, right? I want my bank to commit to me for this loan. You can want that, but you pay a higher premium. So a committed loan generally is a higher premium, you need to pay more. Uncommitted loan is cheaper. So it really depends on how the company wants to manage their costs and what kind of loans they want. So generally, most companies will have a mixture of committed and uncommitted. So you don't only do either or, they do a mixture, right? Almost like a compromise policy that we talk about, right? Now I will not cover this because this is a bit more complex to explain what's a compensating balance. There's this revolving arrangement. Revolving arrangement means that we can keep on using the loan. So we use the loan for, let's say, 30 days. Then you pay the principal. Now, in the next month, if you need to use the loan, you can reuse again. All right? But of course, this is a special arrangement where it's revolving. But as we know, most loans are not revolving, right? When we take a mortgage, let's say for our house that we buy, it doesn't mean that our mortgage will keep on rolling, right? Like after it matures, you're definitely going to roll over. Roll over means it's going to be renewed, not necessarily so. But in this revolving arrangement, will keep on going. There are some things called trade credit. Trade credit means that loans relating purely to receivable, purely to payables, right? And they can be very complex. So I'll not go into much detail in this. Secured loan. So generally, the idea of a secured loan is that this loan is being secured or collateralized. So hope everyone have heard this collateralized. So it means that there is collateral on this loan. So for example, like guarantee, or like if for most of the case for bank, they will want an asset. So for example, they want account receivable financing, right? So that means the bank would take the accounts receivable from you, then they give you the loan, right? That's one example. Or inventory kind of loan. So they take your inventory. Of course, they can't really take your inventory. They can take like a this is like the legal rights, right? The legal rights to your inventory. Or it can be, let's say, warehouse kind of financing where they take on you promise them if you cannot pay, you will give them the warehouse. So it's called warehouse kind of financing. So the warehouse is like the asset that is securing the loan in this. Any questions here?
The warehouse has to be owned by the company, right? If it's like rented, then this one doesn't work, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes. Correct. If it's rental, then yeah, cannot. So if rental means that the company cannot get this kind of warehouse financing. Yeah, maybe they can try others, or like maybe inventory kind of financing or accounts receivable financing. Thanks for the question. All right. Okay, so that's all about different restrictive kind of financing policies and what can be done. Now, let's look at cash budgeting. So cash budgeting, right, is generally a tool to kind of like determine, do we have enough cash in the short run? It is a estimation process, and we look again at only cash, meaning cash collection and cash outflow. All right. We do have a very extensive example on these fund toys to explain how we do a cash kind of budgeting here. Okay, so let's look at this example here. We have various sales for the quarters given by this, right? These are the sales figures. Beginning receivables is given by this. Okay. Collection. Remember, collection is how much you're going to collect, right? In terms of the cash. So collection is the beginning receivable plus the half of the sales. So half of the sales per quarter will be collected during that quarter. Accounts receivable is 60% of the sales, right? So 60% of sales, account payable is 60% of sales, meaning that this would be the amount that you have to pay your suppliers for the inventories, all right? Wages, tax, and other expense is 20%. So these are like expenses are 20%. Interest and dividend payment is 20 million per quarter. So you're going to pay some interest. They did say that second quarter, there is a major expansion plan that is going to happen. Okay. They tell you what's the beginning cash balance. And now they tell you what is the minimum cash balance that must be on hand. So this is the, the cash that they die must have of 10 million. All right. So in this question, we need to reconstruct the cash collection and cash dispersion flow. And it's not too complicated because remember you have Excel. So, once you do the first quarter, you can just drag and pull the formulas for quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, and we can get answer quite immediately. So remember all the various criteria that we mentioned in the previous slide. So I'll not jump here and there. But what's happening here is that first we put in the beginning receivable. All right. We know we have a sales given the question. We know what is the cash collection. Remember, cash collection is the beginning plus half the sales amount. So this is the thing given to you. Then we have our ending, right? Ending is what? Ending, basically, is the 50% of the sales that's remaining, right? So that is the ending amount of accounts receivable, right? Because 50% will be collected in cash, the other 50% would remain. And so your ending receivable will become your beginning receivable. So you go up like this. Again, you repeat the process. All right, you just repeat the process here. Now, excuse me. In terms of the cash disbursement, we look at now the accounts payable, right? Because cash disbursement is more like your suppliers and all this, right? So we know that initially our accounts payable is 60% of sales, which is given here. Wages and taxes, the question to us 20% of the sales, which we put here. Capital expenditure, we know that it will only happen in quarter 2, which is 100. And we have our long-term financing expenses, which is given the question that's 20 or the quarters. We can calculate what is our total cash disbursement. So we just total all this. All right, so we total. And so what this portion in blue is the portion that we're interested in. Remember, the portion that we're interested in is the cash in, cash out. So cash in is your cash collection, cash out is your disbursement. And so what do we do? After we know what's our cash in, cash out, we can input this here. So we are just pulling all our figures together like this. And so we notice that, hey, you know what? There are some parts that are red, right? But these are just the cash in, cash out. We know that the company has a liquidity policy where at the beginning, there's 20, right? The net cash flow after considering the cash in, cash out is 40 given here. Now, the minimum ending cash is 40 plus 20, which is given here. And we know there's a minimum, right? Every time there's a minimum requirement of 10. So we need to include the minimum inside our so-called cumulative surplus or deficit. So at the end of the day, right, we need to take 60 minus 10 because 10 is for sure need to be there, right? So you have 50 here. Now, of course, we know that the next year, what will happen is the 60 will go up, right? It's not 50, right? Because that minimum is just what the company needs, but physically they have 60. So 60 will go up here. Then we need to repeat this again. And then can we see here that from quarter 2 onwards, everything is going to be in the red. Meaning what? Meaning from quarter 2 onwards or from the beginning, so ending of quarter 2 or beginning of quarter 3, we will need to consider some kind of financing that's required because there's a cash deficit. And the kind of financing, as we discussed earlier, we can talk about secured kind of financing, unsecured financing, maybe trade financing, various financing, right? So but basically at the end of the day is that we need some kind of financing to meet the cash deficit that we have seen here. All right. So I would say the best way to do this is to at least reconstruct this table once on Excel. Maybe have that template with you just in case exam come out, right? You can just change the numbers here and there, but just be very careful when you change the numbers. Make sure your formulas are updated, all right? But I highly encourage you to at least give it a try to reconstruct this in Excel at least once. Okay, so you know what? Let's take a 7 minutes break. As usual, we'll do 2 breaks like what we have been doing. So let's take a 7 minutes break. We'll come back at I think 9:45. Let's come at 9:45. Right. All right, welcome back. So we'll move on to the next part of the lecture. So this part of lecture, we'll talk about, various other kind of issues relating to working capital management, or more importantly, more like credit management, right? So just now we already mentioned a few like things about restrictive kind of policies or more flexible policies, and the main thing is like, let we want to do a flexible policy, yeah, it's good, but there's also related costs involved, right? If we are using a the long-term financing for the fluctuations, remember the cost is higher, right? If you take a long-term loan, is higher. So there are various trade-offs that we need to consider. Now, in terms of the components of the type of credit policies, we need to know this thing called the term of sales. We'll be calculating this in a bit, where if you meet certain terms, you can get some kind of discount on the on the product, right? So you get a small kind of discount. We have mentioned this in lecture 1 about credit analysis. This is relating more to, you need to do a credit analysis and of course identify good customers before granting them the credit terms, right? And in terms of collection policies, you need to see how best to collect your money. Okay, so let's look at the first one first, the credit terms. So there's a basic form here, and I want to repeat that, or I want to comment that this way of calculation is very standard, in a sense that I highly encourage you to at least try calculating it once, and after that it will always be kind of like the same methods of calculating. So the form is like this: 2/10 net 45. So what does this mean? It means that you get a 2% discount if you pay within 10 days, right? 2/10. If not, if you don't pay within 10 days, you must pay within 45 days. All right. Okay, so the question is, how should we take this discount in the first place? Is it a good discount to take? Should you pay within 10 days? So let's have a look here. Okay. Suppose you buy $500 worth of merchandise with the above credit terms. So if you're going to get a 2% discount, means what? You only have to pay 490 in the 10 you pay within 10 days. But if you can't pay within 10 days, you pay the full 500 in 45 days. So effectively, what's happening here? You are paying $10 of interest for every 35 days. How you get 35? You take 45 minus 10, right? So from the 11, 12, 13, 14 day, all the way to 45 day, which is 35 days in total, you actually pay a $10 interest if you can't pay within the 10 days. And the question now is, how do we calculate the percentage of this interest? So we're going to fall back onto what we learned previously in lecture 2 on APR and EAR, effective and annual periodic rate. So what do we do here? We have to find the implied interest rate when the customer do not take this discount. So I'll repeat again, we have 2/10, 45. And so we know that the interest is $10, right? What is the period rate? Remember what's period rate? Period rate is your 10 divided by 490. Right? So I've put the formula here to remind you again. All right. So we calculate what's the period rate. So the period rate is given by this. Now, in terms of the period that you're interested in, is only 35 days, right? Because you pay within 10 days, you get the discount, but anything from 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 days, all the way up to 45, you have to pay the full amount. So you take 45 minus 10, we are interested in the 35 day. And how do we calculate the annual percentage rate? we take the, remember, the period is, the formula is periodic rate times the number of period per year, right? So what's the number of period per year? So we take the period rate divided by 35, because you know that that rate is for 35 days, times 365, which is what's given here. So the annual percentage rate is actually quite high, 21.28%. Now, remember I mentioned we need to also calculate what's the effective annual rate. And again, this is the formula in lecture 2. So if you forget, feel free to look through the lecture recordings again or flip back to the notes. All right. So we have to calculate the effective annual rate. And how do we do that? We take the nominal rate, nominal or APR. This is the sorry, not APR. Yes, the APR divided by M, which is number of periods or months. Then we move it up by or we power it by the number of periods, right? So in this case, what do? We take 1 plus 2 point this amount, which is actually it's the period rate. So I'm just going to flip back again. Can you see here? This is the period rate here. So because APR is this, so APR, so it's just a bit of like kind of algebra, right? So APR is this, the period rate times 365 divided by 35. Now, if we take period rate divided by norm, this will give us the, sorry, if you take APR divided by M, this will actually give us the period rate, which is why we just input period rate immediately here. Now, in terms of what's the M is 365 divided by 35. And so you need -1, and then we get this. So this is the effective annual rate given by this. So if the company did not pay within the 10 days, they are actually foregoing actually quite a lot, 23% kind of interest, or they have to pay 23.45% interest. Okay, so we do have a practice question here for you to actually try. And again, I want to mention it's a very mechanical process. It's the same, all right? It's always the same. So let's look at this example here. In order to speed up collection, you offer a customer a credit term 1/15 net 60. So anyone want to give it a try? What does this means? What does 1/15 net 60 means? Anyone like to give a try? What does this? So 1% if you pay within 15 days. Yeah, 1% within 15 days. If you don't pay within 15 days, no discount. All right. Yeah, thank you. That's right. So what is the implied interest to the firm if a customer choose to take, sorry, there's a typo here. If the customer choose to take advantage of the early payment discount. So this question, we have to calculate first what is the APR, then we calculate what's the EAR, right? So I'm just going to toggle to the notes here to show you how to do it. So in this question, we are not given the amount, right? We're not given the what's the amount was being the cost, the loan, etc. But we don't need it. We can just let it be X. So let's start by first saying, let X be the amount purchased by customer purchase. Okay, amount purchased. So we have X. So we know that interest is 1% if they pay, as in they need to pay 1% less, right? If they pay within 15 days. So what is the interest amount? So interest amount is 0.01x, right? 0.1% of the amount that's being purchased. Now, what's the period rate? So period rate, recall period rate is 0.01, which is the interest amount, right? Divided by the x minus the interest amount, right? Remember in the previous example, it was 490 because it was 500 minus 10, right? So it's the same thing, x minus 0.01x. And what does this give us? 0.01 divided by 0.99. Can you see? The x cancel out. So we are safe. We are no longer have the x already. So we can, after this, we calculate what's the APR, which is 1.01. So again, we plug in the APR formula. It's 365. It was what, 60 minus 15, right? So remember, if you pay on the 16th day, 17th day, 18th day, you just pay the full amount, right? So what is the APR? We need to scale it, right? By 60 minus 15. And this should give 8.9. All right. What is the EAR? Effective annual rate. 1 plus the period rate, right? And we scale it again by the factor of 365 divided by 60 minus 15. So it's 8.49%. Now, the question here is, if your cost of capital is 9%, should you take this trade discount? Yes or no, and why? So anyone like to give a try? Should you take this trade discount if your cost of capital is 9%? No? Yes. Perfect. Thanks for the answer. Yeah, that's right. It's not enough to cover your cost of capital. Perfect. Yeah. And that's because of opportunity cost. That's right. So no, you should not. So the answer is no. And what your friend had mentioned is correct. Yeah, it's not enough to cover opportunity cost. Okay, so that's all for terms of calculation. Again, I want to say that it's very repetitive. I highly recommend you to just try really calculate it at least once by yourself prior to the final exam. Okay. All right. So let's look at what's the optimal credit policy. So there are various costs involved here. There is so now this credit policy, we're thinking about credit. So there is carrying costs and opportunity cost. So this is the definition given to you. So what's the carrying cost? So carrying cost is the cost that the cash flow must be incurred when credit is granted. So this is the interest, right? The interest relating to getting the credit, right? Remember I say that, oh, longer maturity, the interest is higher. So this is a carrying cost. What's the opportunity cost? Opportunity cost is the loss of sales from refusing to give credit. So in this sense, what does this mean? It means that, let's say you have a client or customer, he will only buy from you if you grant him 30 days terms. But if you don't want to give him any credit, then you will lose his sales. So it's opportunity cost that is involved. So in this sense, the optimal, so as you increase the amount of credit extended, of course, your carrying costs increase because higher costs, there's more credit, more costs. And at the same time, with more credit, there's lesser opportunity cost here, right? Because you are less likely to lose out the sales. So the optimal is when both costs intersect each other. Carrying costs intersect the opportunity costs. And this relates to credit policy. All right. Later we'll look at the inventory policies. So this is credit policy now. So again, I repeat, the optimal is where the opportunity cost and the carrying cost cut each other here, right? So this is the optimal amount of credit that you should take. I'll not go through this credit analysis. We have talked about this in lecture 1 and in quite detail. And at the same time, I think in the TMA, I think all of you all did very well for credit analysis. Collection policies, you can just read through them, what are the ways to collect money, not too important. Okay, so now inventory management. So this is what I want to talk about. Remember just now we covered the credit policy, what is the optimal credit. Now we want to determine what is the optimal inventory. So in terms of optimal inventory, of course, there's cost of carrying too much inventory, cost like storage costs and stuff, right? Those are costs related to carrying too much inventory. And there are costs of carrying not enough inventory as well. So again, there is a trade-off that we need to consider here. So in terms of inventory, there are various types. We have kind of raw material, we have things that are still work in progress, and maybe more like finished goods, so things that are ready to be shipped and sold. Okay, so move on to next. Okay, so in terms of carrying costs, so this is now cost relating to having inventory in your warehouse, and shortage cost, right? Shortage cost is the cost that because you do not have enough inventory, you have not enough to sell, so you lose the sales. Shortage cost can relate to also restocking costs, like if you have more shortage, you have to restock the inventory more often. This could result in higher costs as well. So the graph looks exactly the same, but I want to highlight that this is related to inventory and the type of cost is different. Remember just now, it was opportunity cost and also carrying costs, but now we are talking about carrying costs and restocking costs. And the definitions are different, so please be very careful. So the definitions are given here. So we see that, of course, restocking cost decreases as we carry more and more inventory, right? As we carry a larger inventory, we don't have to restock the inventory more often, and we are less likely to lose sales because of not enough inventory, right? So restocking costs decrease as we have more inventory. Now, of course, we have more inventory, we need to have more warehouse space, we need more insurance, etc. So our carrying costs will increase as the size of inventory increase. Again, the optimal level is at the point where both things cut each other. And the optimal is this thing called EOQ, which we'll see in the next slide. So at the optimal level, you have the lowest total cost. Okay, so what's this EOQ? So EOQ is economic order quantity, and how do we calculate this? It is given by this formula here, EOQ. I repeat that this is important because of course it has not been tested before, but again, it's easy in the sense that it's very standard. Like the questions are very standard. The tricky part I want to highlight here is the units. So I have underlined here for you. You need to make sure that the units are per year for T. So the number of units sold must be per year basis. Fixed cost is so fixed cost is per order, of course. And inventory must be per unit. So we need to make sure that the units are rightly specified. And you just plug in the figure here, you should get the EOQ. We'll have one very extensive example to go through. So do not worry. In terms of the total inventory cost, so total inventory cost relates to both the carrying cost and restocking costs. I'm just going to flip over to the previous slide. Remember, can you see the total inventory cost is the summation of both the carrying cost and the restocking cost. So how do we calculate the carrying cost? Is given by Q divided by 2 times CC. Q is the quantity purchased. CC here is given by the inventory cost, carrying cost per unit. In terms of the total restocking cost is given by T divided by Q. Again, T is the number of units sold per year divided by quantity that's being purchased. And multiply this by the fixed cost per order. So this is a example of EOQ. The question is that, we are given what is the carrying cost per unit, 150. Again, remember, units are important. So this is correct, right? 150 per unit. So we need it per unit, which is correct. The fixed order cost is 50 per order, is correct as well. That's good. Firm sells 100k units per year. So this is good as well, right? Everything is per unit, per order, per year. All the units, all the right denominator that require. We just plug it into the formula. We can calculate what's the EOQ, which is given here. So in terms of EOQ is the most optimal level of quantity, right? Of course, then we can modify the EOQ a little. We can include, for example, more of like safety stock level. What is the minimum that you reach? After you reach, then you must order. Because you do not want you want to give it a buffer, right? You do not want it to exactly the EOQ, so you give it a buffer. Or what is the reorder point? At which point, what's the level of inventory? Then you have to reorder, accounting for the delivery time, right? Because there might be some shipping delays and time required to ship the products. This one you can just read through them. There are just some other demand-driven inventory techniques. You can just have a look. So that earlier we talked about just in time. And this is material requirement planning. Basically, you're using computers to kind of simulate, give you some prediction of what kind of inventory you have and when you need to reorder them. Okay, so this is a comprehensive question on the EOQ that I like to go through. It's a very typical, again, like kind of exam question that can come up. Okay, so what do we have here? So clap off manufacturing uses 1150 switches, example, per week. So we're given per week here, all right? And then reorder them another 1150. So every week you'll keep on reordering. So this one we already know per week is off. Remember, we need per year. So this one is we need to do some calculation conversion. Relevant cost per switch is 550. Okay, per switch. That's good. Fixed cost is 625. Fine. So what's the optimal company inventory policy? Okay, so let's remember, first of all, we need to adjust the order. So we adjust the order by, because it's per week, we convert it to per year. So we adjust it to this. We can calculate what's the EOQ. So we simply just plug in the formula 2 times this amount times this and the 550, right? The fixed cost and the carrying cost per unit, right? 550. And we square it, or take a square root, sorry, not square it. So the economic order quantity is this amount, right? 3687 means what? It means that the number of order we need per year is 16. We do 16 orders per year. And what are we ordering now? We are ordering 1150, but the economic order quantity is 3687. So what do we need to do? We need to increase the order, right? From 1150 to the EOQ of 3687. At the same time, we need to decrease the number of orders as well. And this makes sense, right? We need decreased orders because if we have too much order, we are incurring excessive amount of costs or reordering costs, right? So yes, we need to decrease the number of order from 52 per year to 16 per year based on the EOQ. So that's the first part on the EOQ. Now we need to consider the costs involved. Okay, so how do we calculate first the carrying cost? So the carrying cost, we take 1150 divided by 2 times 5.5. So this basically these are the formulas that we just plug in, right? Now, what's the total restocking cost? The same thing, we also plug in the formulas and we find these two numbers here. Now, we go back to the graph. We know that the optimal level is when the restocking cost equals to the carrying cost, where it cuts each other at this point here. And so this is the optimal level, meaning what? It means that since these two numbers are not equal, they are not an optimal level of cost. And so we should either not increase the carrying cost, but we should reduce the restocking cost. And it makes sense, right? Because so restocking cost is super high. Why? Let's go back to here. Can you see that you're restocking 52 times and actually the right restocking that you should do is only 16 times. So it makes sense, right? Your restocking cost is super high. So yeah, it's the calculation makes sense in this context. So it's always of course good to always try to think, oh, does it make sense? And of course answer the question as well. So the total cost, you just simply just add both of them up together like this. I'll pause here. Any questions? Any questions regarding this EOQ? Any doubts? No, we are okay. So this EOQ, right, basically ends off the lecture materials. Like we have covered everything that we require for the final exam. So at this point in time, I think what we can do is that first of all, there's this final component here in your lecture slides. It's called discussion question of MPV. Why this is in place is that because MPV has not been tested in GBA or TMA and it's very extensive, we saw many type of questions. I thought of just putting a few more kind of questions to discuss on MPV. But before we do that, I think we have also a bit of time. So do we have any like questions relating to other topics that you might have, or you have been practicing the past year paper and not too sure about any questions that you like to ask? So So again, I repeat that we have covered all the syllabus required for the final exam and all the content. So this last portion is more like a review, and I would like to also answer any questions. So of course, this being the last lecture as well. Yeah, be nice to answer some questions. If you have no questions, then we'll carry on with the discussion questions on MPV. So any questions? Or all of you are okay? Then we proceed with discussion questions on MPV. Okay, no question. All right, so if you do have any questions along the way on the MPV questions that we're going to discuss, feel free to stop me. If not, then we'll do the MPV discussion. Okay. Okay, so I think there are three questions. I believe three questions. And the thing is, I have given all the answers to you, so you can review them prior to your final exam as well. All right. So the questions are slightly more challenging compared to the lecture examples. And they incorporate all the knowledge that you have learned. Because I realized that the lecture on MPV, there's not enough practice question, and sometimes when you really see the question, you might be shocked and not know how to answer it, right? Especially in a final exam, the stress and everything. So hopefully you can, even though the answers are provided, maybe try to even practice it without looking at the answers. That would be great, so that to reinforce what you've learned in MPV. All right, so MPV, the concept, at the end of the day, remember, is about evaluating whether a firm should take on a project or should not take on a project, right? So project evaluation, we are given the various details here. We have revenue for year 1, 2, 3, 4, and thereafter 0, right? So it looks like it's a 4-year kind of project. You only have a revenue coming in year 1, and year 2 to 4 is lesser. Okay, so we are given a lot of information, which is a very typical MPV kind of way. So do not be too afraid when you see so much information. So we have expenses are expected to be 40% of revenue. That's what's given. Working capital requirement in each year is expected to be 20% of revenue in the following year. So this is important. This following year, product requires an immediate investment of this. So there's immediate investment required. So this is your fixed asset, right? Investment in fixed asset, or NCS. If plant and equipment are depreciated over 4 years to salvage of 0 using straight line. So they're given to you that there's no salvage value at the end. Tax rate is 40%. So they as you project the cash flow, discount rate of 12%, what is the project MPV and IRR? Okay, so in this kind of question, right, in exam, typically you are being asked to project the cash flow. Thereafter, you're supposed to make a decision. So unfortunately, if you project the cash flow wrongly, and your decision is the reverse. So for example, it's supposed to reject but you accept. Unfortunately, your whole answer is wrong because the marker cannot even give you any marks. So that's why when you do your cash flow projections, please be very careful and read the question carefully, all right? Because this kind of question is usually very long and has a lot of marks. So if you miss out a significant component of it such that it forces your MPV or IRR to give you a different decision, then it's very hard to give any marks already. But if it's a small mistake, still not so bad. You can get method marks. All right. Okay, so let's look at number 1. So we first of all calculate what's the depreciation, because we are interested in the operating cash flow. Okay, I want to repeat here that revenue is not equals to operating cash flow. So I think last term, something like this came out, like something like this, meaning an MPV kind of question came out in the final exam. And a lot of students confuse, I mean, maybe it's exam stress or panic or whatever. They treat revenue as equals to operating cash flow, and they did not even consider the cash shield approach and all the things that we talk about. If you kind of forget, I highly recommend to watch the recording, but they did not consider anything, and they just use revenue. And once you do like such a mistake, like you just use revenue instead of operating cash flow, your whole answer is all wrong, right? So unfortunately, you cannot get any marks. Right? So please be very careful. This is revenue, it's not operating cash flow. We do need to calculate operating cash flow. All right. So I've just put I just put the various numbers for revenues here. Now the working capital here is very interesting because we are using the working capital. So I'm just going to flip back to a question here. Let's see, working capital requirement for each year is expected to be 20% of the following year. So it's following year. So it means what? For year 0, there'll be a working capital requirement based on year 1. For year 1 is based on year 2. Year 2 based on year 3. Then year 3 based on year 4. Year 4 based on year 5. All right. So it's like diagonal, right? So I've calculated the various working capital requirements here. And after this, I use the cash shielding approach or tax shielding approach to calculate what is the operating cash flow. Remember, we're adding back the, of course, we do after tax for the revenue. Then we add back the depreciation. So you know why I did 60%, right? Because I'm going to flip back to the question. They say that expenses are 40%. So it means what? The gross profit, which is cost, sales minus cost, is 60%. That's why there's a 60% here. All right, there's a 60% here. And so again, because the revenues are different from year 2 to year 4, I'll need to calculate what's the operating cash flow for year 2 to year 4. I repeat again, revenue is not operating cash flow. So please, hopefully, if you have your notes in front of you, write it down. So in exam, please do not panic and forget everything and put revenue as operating cash flow. All right. Okay, so once we calculate operating cash flow, which is given here, we can now reconstruct the cash flows, right, in the various years. In the question is given, so I'm not flip back the question, but if you have a question in front of you, we know that in year 0, there is a fixed asset that needs to be bought, which is 45K, given, given here. And at the end of the day, there is no salvage. So in this question, there's no salvage, right? But remember, if there's salvage, we need to do after-tax salvage and all those calculations, right? I think we have a question later that needs that one, after-tax salvage. So just be cognizant that we need to consider that as well. What else? So in year, okay, so how do we determine the negative change in working capital? So it's important, negative change. So I'm just going to flip back. So can you see in year 0, there is an increase of 8,000, right? Means what? The negative change in year 0 is negative 8,000, right? Which is here. Can you see here? Now, I'm going back to this so it's easy to see. From year 0 to year 1, what happened? The working capital decreased by 3,000, right? So the negative change is positive 3,000, right? I hope all of you are following me now. Now, what happens in year 1 to year 2? There's no change. So it becomes 0, 0. And finally, what happens? Remember, at the end of everything, there must be a recovery, right? Your negative change in working capital must always equate to 0. So how do we equate this to 0? We put a 5,000 there, which is the recovery. Any questions regarding the working capital calculations? No? Okay. Now, operating...
Sorry, you
yeah.
mean the end of it have to do recovery is the end of the project, is it?
Yes, end of project. Yeah, correct. End of your projection period. So in this project is a 4-year period. So 4-year on the 4th year we do the recovery. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so now in terms of operating cash flow, of course the operating cash flow only starts in year 1. So we have already calculated. I'm just going to flip over. So we have calculated these two things, right? And year 1 and year 2, year 3. So year 1 versus year 2, 3, 4 is different, right? We have calculated 2 figures. So we plug in the numbers. So we have plugged in all these numbers here. And then we compute this, right? Once we get the CFA, then is the, I guess, easy part. We use the MPV formula. We use the IRR. I want to remind you again for MPV. Remember that we only MPV from year 1 to year 4 in terms of the Excel formula, because it's how the Excel formula is created. Then we need to plus back this one, right? Plus back year 0. So if you can't recall that, do review the lecture recordings again. Yeah, so we just MPV the thing. And in this case, we reject the project because the MPV is negative. Any questions? So this is the first question that we'll go through. The second one, again, is a long question. We'll try to dissect it slowly together. Okay. All right. So let's look at question 2. So question 2, again, we have a project. Requires an investment of 10 million at the start. So this is your NCS. Equipment can be sold for 2 million at the end of 5 years. Okay, so now we have salvage value. So please take note of SV, so salvage value, right? That's SV, salvage value. Company applies a straight line depreciation over 5 years to 0, fine. Okay, depreciation to 0. So company expects to sell 750k pounds of product per year and $20 per pound. Expenses is 10 million. Account receivable are 1/6 of revenue. Inventory is 50% of following year's expenses. Okay, this is important. And company tax is this, discount rate is this. Okay. Again, we ask to compute what is the cash flow and project MPV and IRR. So again, a lot of information. Let's try to slowly dissect them. Okay, so let's start with depreciation first. Remember, it's straight line to 0 for 5 years, right? So we can calculate depreciation given here, right? after-tax salvage. Remember, after-tax salvage is what? Salvage minus tax times salvage minus residual value, right? So because you use a straight line to zero, there is no residual value here. So your salvage, your after-tax salvage is this. In terms of AR, remember accounts receivable. So accounts receivable is what? 1/6 of revenue. So what is revenue now? Revenue is this, right? Revenue is 750K times 20 pounds. So that's revenue. So we did this 750K times 20 pounds divided by 6. So this is your AR. In terms of inventory, is 15% of expenses, right? So what's your expenses? Let me just flip over. Question given here, total expense is 10 million. So is this this is the expenses. Again, I want to highlight again, we need to calculate operating cash flow. And we use, in this case, we use the tax shield approach, which is quite simple. So we take the revenue earned, this is revenue earned, minus the expenses, right? Multiplied by 1 minus tax, plus the depreciation times tax, right? So actually, once you notice that you have to calculate various functions for accounts receivable and inventory, you know that, or you should kind of know that, hey, you know what? The working capital can be a bit tricky here. So in this question, the tricky part is working capital. So what's happening here now? So the gray part is just more like working. I want to highlight to you, gray part is more working. The black part is like the real answer, right? So now in terms of fixed asset, or in terms of the NCS, right? We know that there will be investment of fixed asset for 10 million in the year 0. We also calculated earlier there is after-tax salvage in year 5, right? We have done that. Let's look at operating cash flow first. So let's omit the working capital. Let's focus on operating cash flow, which is here. We have calculated various operating cash flow, and it's very standard. It's not too complicated. From year 1 to year 5, right? The project is 5 years here, correct? Now, the very tricky part here is your working capital. So what's happening now? I'm just going back to a question. So they say that account receivable is 1/6 of revenue, inventory is 15% of following year's expense. So because we are reconstructing our accounts in the working capital formula, AR is the actual year, right? Actual year. So AR is 2.5 million, 2.5 million is the actual year on this. But your expenses is the following year, right? Following year means what? Your inventory is the following year. So inventory starts in year 0. Can you see? These are the inventory. Means what? In year 0, there will be you require 1.5 million of working capital. And this was attributed to inventory related, right? Inventory related working capital. So the negative change is 1.5 million. Now, in year 1, you require, what is the total required? Your total required is this, which is what? 4 million. So there will be an increase of 2.5 million, and therefore a negative change is negative 2.5 million. Right? From year 2, 3, 4, can you see that there is no change? So no change, no change. So nothing changed. Now, in year 5, your inventory stopped, right? So now what is happening here? In year 5, there will be a decrease in working capital, right? Which is why we have to do a 1.5 million, because can you see that we still need working capital for your AR, but your inventory gone already. So we need a positive, right? Because negative change or negative decrease is a positive. Okay. Now, in year 6, okay, remember your project ends in year 5. So this question did not say that there's a year 6, but because of working capital, your year 6 must be there. And this year 6, you can think of it almost like a recovery of your working capital, right? So your year 6 must be there. Or if you don't think of it as a recovery, you can think of it as what? Oh, in year 6, can you see your working capital is 0, nothing here. So what must you do? You must remove away your AR, your working capital AR, which is this, which is why the decrease of 2.5 million, the negative decrease is a positive, which is this. Any questions for working capital? Like this, why is there a year 6 and everything? Everyone clear with it? Okay, so the toughest part is actually this working capital. Once you figure out how to do the working capital, you plug again, you just do the summation and you find what's your CFA, and you just do the same thing here. I'll not go through again. So this question is tough because of working capital requirement. And you need to know that there will be a year 6. Although the project ends in year 5, there'll be a year 6 cash flow that's happening. Right? So do not worry, maybe it might be a bit heavy to understand the question. You can go back, review it. If you have any questions, feel free to email me before, of course, not one day before exam, but like as you revise, do email me if you have any questions. I'll answer them pretty quickly. All right. Okay, so let's do one last question. And this question, so if you notice, right, the 3 questions that I have selected have a very unique kind of like trick into them, right? So that's why I select this kind of question, which is a bit trickier, and a bit more like the exam question where they will try to trick you in some sense, and trick you not in like, like hide information or what, but you need to be very careful when you do the question and need to realize certain things. Like in the question 2, it was the working capital that was a bit tricky, right? Then it was in question 1, we had to again, the working capital was a bit tricky, that we need to ensure a recovery. But of course, if we know that we need to do a recovery, then it was more on the change in the operating cash flow, because we need to do, there was a change in the revenue component. So the operating cash flow changes. All right. Okay, so question 3, we have, let's go through the question first, and then I'll explain to you what is the trick here that is very tricky. So we have 2 batteries for electric golf cart in a country club. All right. Assume constant battery replacement. The table is based on a forecast. They have 50% discount rate, 34% tax rate. We use a straight line depreciation to 0. All right. And so we have 2 batteries, burn out and evergo. We are given the cost involved in each battery, the life of the battery. I want to point out here immediately, do you notice something? The life of the battery are different. right? We are comparing two batteries with different life. So this is an interesting scenario already. In previous case, have we done that? No, we have never compared projects, right? We are always assuming we only have one project. We compute the cash flow for that project. We accept or reject a project. There is no like project A, project B, project C, and then we calculate project A, B, C. So now this is an interesting scenario. We are comparing almost like two projects, but in this case, two batteries. Okay, so annual cost to keep it charged is this. There's a salvage value as well. We need to consider here. Okay. I hope no questions regarding the differences in this question. So this question 3 is asking you to compare two battery, which is almost like comparing two different projects. And so far, in none of our example have we done comparison of projects. We have always assumed that there's only one project, we do that project, that's all, finish, right? We reject or accept that project. But now we're comparing two projects or two batteries in this case. Okay, so let's do the same thing, let's reconstruct. So it's the same concept again, but let's do for burnout. Okay, so, the answers again are given to you. I'll run through them. Do not worry, like, wow, how come that suddenly you do time value of money and all things? Let me try to explain to you. All right. Okay, so we do have a battery. We know that depreciation for the burnout battery is for 3 years. Initial cost is 36 that we need to pay. So this is the depreciation expense, right? Kind of standard. The usual thing, we need to calculate what's the after-tax salvage. So we plug in the formula for after-tax salvage. Because we depreciated to 0, so there is no salvage value. Sorry, there's no residual value. Now, in terms of operating cash flow, I will just flip back to the question. We say that the cost involved to keep it charged is $100, right? $100. So basically, in this case, it's a bit unique. There is no revenue that's being generated because we want to compare batteries, right? And we want to compare what the cost versus how long it lasts, and also the initial investment, right? There are 3 components here now. So in the operating cash flow component, there is no revenue, of course, because we are not really interested in the revenue. We are comparing costs. All right. So, but the same concept. So we plug in the value of the cost of 100 in the operating cash flow. We input the depreciation here because it's non-cash, right? And we get the operating cash flow. Of course, it's negative, right? Because these are all relating to costs. We input, first of all, the NCS or FA, which is this, right? So initially we need to buy the battery for $36. And then at the end we have a salvage here of $3.3. In terms of the operating cash flow, we know that for each year we need to pay almost $62, right? Around $62. Then we total all this, right, to give our CFFA. So all of it is negative, don't worry, because remember, we are working with costs. So it should be all negative. Now, let's calculate what is the NPV now. Of course, it's negative. It must be negative because everything is negative. So we get NPV of this. However, okay, so I'm just going to flip the slide first. Let's not talk about this first. Let's put it on hold. Let's put this on hold first. So I did not show you the solution for Evergo, but I want you all to calculate do the exact same thing that we've done for burnout and try to get the NPV of this. All right. Okay. Based on NPV alone, this for Evergo and burnout of what negative 175.22. Which one should you select as the battery for your go-kart based on MPV alone? Okay, why you want to select Evergo? Okay, okay. Now, must be very careful here. Your MPVs are negative now. All right. So you remember, okay, so the idea of MPV is you want to select the highest MPV, right? The best MPV. The higher MPV, the better. Now, we are in a negative realm, if you want to call it, negative number. Okay, so I'm purely looking at MPV only. Looking at MPV alone, which one is more or which one is less negative? Can you see that your burnout is less negative, right? So negative 175 compared to negative 239. So negative means a cost. So which one will cost more to the firm? Evergo will cost more, right? Based on MPV. So Evergo, you should not accept Evergo. You should accept burnout, because burnout costs less, right? Burnout only costs 175. Your Evergo costs almost 200. So select burnout. Yeah, Alice, you're totally right. But burnout go for 5 years, correct? So now I think you managed to catch this part, right? So burnout go for Evergo go for 5 years, but burnout only goes for 3 years. So comparing MPV is not enough in this case. We need to compare PMT, which is what is happening here. So what's happening now? We have the rate given 15%, the question. At the end of the day, we know the FV is 0. You know that for burnout is 3 years, and we have calculated the MPV being the present value of this amount, 175. And so what we're interested in is to calculate PMT, which is the payment. That means what do we have to pay in terms of expenses every year, but in terms of 3 years, right? Of course, remember everything we do, we cannot take 175 divided by 3. No, right? Because we did not consider time value of money. We cannot do that. If you do this, I think conceptually, right, the marker will be upset. Maybe don't even give you method mark. Because conceptually, you cannot do that. Like throughout the entire course, we are talking about time value of money. So no choice, we have to use the PMT function. We calculated PMT as this. The same thing. I hope that you can test this out and get this answer. You calculate the PMT for Evergo, but for 5 years. And what do you realize? The payment, the expenses that you have to pay is actually lower for Evergo per year. And therefore, based on PMT, you should choose Evergo for the lower cost. So the trick of this question that they are trying to catch you is, first of all, you're comparing 2 projects, but in this case, 2 batteries. But not only that, one is 3 and one is 5 years. You're comparing projects that are different in length. And that is why we have to use time value of money, or the concept of PMT, to scale it. Because why we have to scale it? Because of time value of money, we cannot just take this. We cannot take 3 divided by 5. Or we get some answer, and then we compare it with the other one, which is what? 175, right? 175 divided by 3, and then we get some answer, and then we just compare it, right? We can't do that because of time value of money. We need to use PMT. All right. So any questions regarding this one that we talk about, this example here? So that actually ends off today's lecture. And ends off the entire module. I'd like to, any questions regarding the module, or even the questions that I went through for the time value of money, feel free to reach out to me via email, if you do have any questions during your revision. Yeah, it has been a pleasure teaching you all for the last 6 weeks, or actually a 7th week if you consider the almost like from the change in class from Monday to Friday. It's a pleasure. So it's nice. Any other questions? Okay, so you know what? Maybe I'll just end it here. If you do have any questions, feel free to stay back. I'd like to repeat again, if you do have any queries as you're revising, feel free to drop me an email. I'll usually reply very quickly. Same time, I'll be posting this recording as well, the same thing on Blackboard. Also watch out for your class part marks. I think they should be released on Monday, depending on the approval and all those. So you can at least, judge for yourself, how much, effort you want to put in for finals. If you have been doing well, I guess you can moderate it and put in other mods and stuff, right? And yeah, I would like to thank you all for the class for the last almost 6 or 7 weeks. Study hard for your exam in 3 weeks. I think you all should be fine, especially if you're have been putting in effort for TMA, GBA, you should be doing very well. It should be good. And yeah, I enjoy New York. As you can hear, it's actually quite noisy outside. Let me just pause the recording. I think we're done.